Hello everyone and welcome to the first of 4 mini Latin lessons. As with all of these lessons, the respective worksheet includes some introductory text that takes up and repeats in writing some of the key points that I'm making in these videos, so you may want to read the intro texts alongside the videos, so make sure to take out your lesson 1 worksheet now. For this first lesson, we will look at 2 things. Firstly, at what sort of a language Latin is, what is special about Latin and what makes it different from English. And secondly, we will look at how Latin nouns work in some more detail, and more specifically, we'll tackle concepts like case or declension. So let's get started. What sort of a language is Latin? The key point to remember is that Latin, unlike English, is a so-called inflected language, which means that Latin conveys meaning to a great extent by changing word endings, that is, by inflecting words, where English has to resort to either using a number of different words or, as we will see in a bit, a very rigid word order. For instance, if I want to say I love or even I am in love in Latin, I only need a single word, amo, and the ending or encodes a range of meanings, including that I am the one doing the action, I am the one in love. There are 2 key types of inflection in Latin. There's conjugation, which describes the changing of endings in verbs, so what we might call verbal inflection, and there's declension, which describes the changing of endings in nouns and adjectives, the so-called nominal inflection. Let us look at both of them, at conjugation and declension, in some more detail, starting with conjugation. Remember the verbal form amo, I love. Here is a part of its conjugation table that is an overview of the different endings it takes, and you can also see the same table on the first page of worksheet 1. Here we can see amo, I love, amas, you love, amat, he, she, it loves, and the endings or give us a wealth of information. They tell us the so-called person, that is, who does the verbal action. I, the first person singular, you, the second person singular, or he, she, it, the third person singular. The endings also give us the number, that is, how many people act. Are we talking, for instance, about the first person singular, I, or the first person plural, we? The endings also supply us with the tense, that is, when the action takes place. The conjugation table we're looking at, for example, is the table for the present tense, so we know the action takes place now. And you may know the phenomenon of conjugation from other languages where verbs change endings in similar forms and categories, for instance, in German, French, or Italian, and I've given you the corresponding tables of I love in German, French, and Italian on the first worksheet. Even English, which generally is not an inflected language, has kept remnants of an old conjugation system. The third person singular is marked by a different ending. So in English we say he, she, it loves, and the s at the end marks the third person singular. Latin nouns and adjectives also encode meaning by changing their endings, and this kind of changing is what we call declension. By their different endings, Latin words are marked for number, how many are there, gender is the word masculine, feminine, or neuter, and case, which indicates the word's function in a sentence. And please note that the gender I'm referring to here is grammatical rather than biological. It can align with biological gender, but it doesn't have to. And frequently, the gender just has to be learned alongside Latin nouns, and there isn't necessarily an inherent logic behind that for every single word. As an example of declensions, let us look at the Latin word for God, Deus. The ending os tells us that the noun is singular in number, so we're only talking about one God rather than several. It is masculine in gender, the God is male, and so here grammatical and biological gender coincide. And nominative in case, that is, it supplies the subject of a sentence. This third information, the noun's case, is particularly important and gives us a key difference between Latin and English. Latin creates sentences based on word form, especially the case that a word form indicates, while English creates sentences based on word order. For English, this means that the function of a particular word is determined by its position in this sentence, following the general word order of subject, verb, object. So in English, the sentence, "the master carries the dog," means something entirely different from the sentence, "the dog carries the master." In the first sentence, the master is the subject and the dog the object, and the second, the dog is the subject and the master the object. Their roles are reversed and determined only by their changed positions in the sentence. In Latin, by contrast, word form rather than word order determines the meanings of a sentence. For example, let us look at the Latin translation of the sentence, "the master carries the dog," Dominus canem portat. This sentence has exactly the same meaning if we exchange Dominus and canem, the words for master and dog, and arrive at canem Dominus portat. This also means the master carries the dog. In each case, Dominus is marked by its ending us as nominative case, and thus as the subject, whereas canem by its ending m is marked as the object, irrespective of the word order they happen to be in. So remember, unlike in English, Latin nouns and verbs convey some of the most important differences in meaning through their ending. Let's have an even closer look at Latin nouns, cases and declensions. Cases are best described as the tools that allow Latin nouns and adjectives to express their function in a sentence. Since Latin is, as we've already seen, an inflected language, different cases are differentiated by different endings. There are 5 main cases in Latin: the nominative, the accusative, the genitive, the dative, and the ablative. There's also a 6th case, the vocative, which is used when we address somebody directly. So if I want to say, "hello friend," the Latin word for friend, amicus, comes in the vocative case, and I would say "salve amice," with amice being the vocative. But this is a case we can leave a little bit to the side, since for many instances, not interestingly for amice, the vocative looks very much the same as the nominative in Latin, so we're not going to worry about that at this point. Since English is a largely uninflected language, there are generally no cases in English. But as we could see in the third person singular as in verbs, English still shows remnants of an old inflection system, and the same applies to declensions. The pronouns he, his, and him are examples of such leftovers. They all have different endings that mark the pronoun as subject, he, possessor, his, or object, him, corresponding to the nominative, the genitive, and the accusative case. This already gives us some indication as to what these cases are about, so let's take a closer look, and you can find a full set of examples of cases with Latin and English example sentences on page 3 of the Lesson 1 worksheet. The nominative case describes the subject of a sentence, and it always responds to the question who or what acts. So if we look at the English sentence, "the dog runs," the dog is the one acting here, so the dog corresponds to the Latin nominative case. The accusative case supplies the direct object of the verb, that is, the person or thing immediately affected by the verbal action, and the case name is actually helpful here. So if I say "I accuse someone," then the someone always comes in the object position, so the someone would always come up in the accusative case in a Latin sentence. So remember, accusative, the case that accuses someone, and you can easily remember that the accusative always refers to the object. The genitive case expresses possession and is frequently translated into English with the words either of or with the apostrophe and "us." So if I say "the dog of the master" or "the master's dog," then both "of the master" and "the master's" would correspond to a single word in Latin, and that word would come up in the genitive case. The most frequent use of the dative case is to show the person to whom something is transferred, the so-called indirect object, or for whom, to whose advantage something is being done. So if we look at the English sentence, the father gives a dog to the boy, then a dog supplies us with a direct object. So that would correspond to the Latin accusative. To the boy, by contrast, refers to the person to whom something is being done, and so that corresponds to a Latin dative case. So if I wanted to say to the boy in Latin, all I'd have to do is take the dative case of the word boy, and that would give us exactly the same meaning as the three English words to the boy. The ablative describes the means, instrument, origin, or cause of an action, and is thus most frequently translated with the words by, with, or from. To give you 3 different examples, we could look at sentences like, we will conquer the enemy by virtue, the poet sings a song with a lyre, the poet hurts from love. So all 3 of these expressions, by virtue, with a lyre, from love, would correspond to Latin ablatives. So in Latin, again, we'd only have a single word in each case, but a word coming up in the ablative case. A helpful exercise for getting to grips with Latin cases is to actually look at English sentences and identify the corresponding cases for all of its noun phrases. And I've given you a slightly different example exercise on page 4 of the Lesson 1 worksheet, but now we're looking at a new sentence. Our English sentence is, Jane carried Sam's dog for him with a basket. The first thing we need to do is to identify all noun phrases in this sentence. So there's firstly Jane, secondly Sam's, thirdly dog, fourthly for him, and as the 5th noun phrase with a basket. Now the first noun phrase, Jane, describes the subject, the one acting in our sentence. So if this sentence were in Latin, Jane would take the nominative case. Sam's belongs very closely with dog. It describes the dog's possessor and thus corresponds to a Latin genitive case. Dog gives us the item immediately affected by Jane's action, or in technical terms, its object. Consequently, it corresponds to the Latin accusative case. For him gives us the person for whom something is being done, that is in Latin, him would appear in the dative case and the whole phrase for him would just be replaced with one Latin word in the dative. With a blanket, finally, supplies the instrument of Jane's action. So if this were a Latin sentence, we would only find one Latin word, the word for basket, in the ablative case. To conclude this mini lesson, we will have a quick look at how cases are formed in Latin. We've already heard that cases are formed by changing the ending of a word, but how do we know what the ending is and what the rest of the word? The rest of the word, that is the uninflected, unchangeable part of a word, is called its stem. To the stem, different endings are attached. The way to find the stem of a Latin noun is to look at its genitive singular form and to remove the genitive singular ending. This is because the nominative sometimes actually looks a little bit funny and quite different from all the other forms of the noun. This is particularly the case in the 3rd declension that we will meet very soon, and so the genitive is the more representative form to learn. As an example, let's look at the Latin word for girl, puella. Puella has the genitive singular puellae with I, that is the combination of A and E, or in Latin A and E, being the ending. So the stem of puella is puel. If we take off the I, puel is what is left. Vox, the Latin word for voice by contrast, goes to vocis in the genitive with the ending is, so its stem is voc. For this reason, the genitive is given alongside the nominative in Latin dictionaries, so if we look up the Latin word for girl in a dictionary, we'll find puella, puellae in the dictionary. Based on their different stems and genders, Latin nouns follow different declension patterns, and I've given you an overview of the 3 Latin declensions on page 5 of the Lesson 1 worksheet. Here you find the declensions of puella, which belongs to the 1st declension, amicus and baculum, which belong to the 2nd declension, and rex, civis, and nomen, which belong to the 3rd declension. If you look at the declension table, you can observe a number of interesting details about Latin declensions. You can see, for instance, that the cases of all declension patterns have singular and plural endings, distinguishing the number of persons or items involved. Look, for instance, at the second declension noun amicus, friend, in the nominative. Amicus is the singular form, a friend or the friend, and here's a side note, there are no articles in Latin, so we always have to deduce from the context whether it's a friend, the friend, or friend. So amicus in the singular, a friend, has the plural amici in the nominative. You can also get from this table a first idea of the differences between the three declensions. First declension nouns like puella end in a and are all feminine except for certain jobs. So the words poeta, poet, and nauta, sailor, are masculine. Second declension nouns ending in us, like amicus, are masculine, while those ending in like baculum, are neuter. Third declension nouns can be any gender, and there's no standard form for the nominative singular, and so we can find a great range of different patterns. But as you will note, all third declension nouns have the same endings for the same cases, and this is actually true for all the declensions. The same cases always lead to the same endings in the nouns of the same declension. Only neuter forms look a little bit different. So whether you look at the neuters of the second declension like baculum or of the third declension like nomen, they have special endings in the nominative and accusative. Not only are nominative and accusative endings for neuters normally the same, but nominative and accusative plural endings tend to end in a. This is all I wanted to tell you for this first video, to give you a rough idea of what the Latin language is, what's special and different about it, and how Latin nouns and declensions work, in particular how the Latin case system works. With this basis, you should hopefully be well equipped to tackle the exercises.